Today we'll be going over the second half of the discussion of Chapter 1 of Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Hill Collins. I hope that everyone has their syllabus ready and is able to go. And we will be continuing a discussion of what was already shared or started by our cohort member, Morgan. And so finally, we're able to do part 2 of Chapter 1. For those who don't know me, I am actually brand new to the cohort. This is my first discussion. I am Nicole Carter, PhD, and I'm, again, new to the cohort. And so I just want to shout out Julie for even considering me to be part of this cohort. So before we get started, remember to grab your syllabus. It should be a link in the description for the live, and it also is located on smartbrowngirl.com if you don't have it yet. So again, this evening we are discussing part 2 of Chapter 1 of Black Feminist Thought, and we're going to start off with Black Feminist Thought as critical social theory. Hey, and so in order to do that, I actually wanted us to discuss what critical social theory is in the first place. I think there's a lot of information out there on social theory and critical social theory. I will say that the book sort of reviews it a little bit, but doesn't go into deep detail about it. So critical social theory focuses on concepts related to social justice and empowerment. It is different than theory for theory's sake. It is actually investing and creating in theory and sharing theory in order to create change. And so critical social theory relates to this chapter and is actually part of the heading of what we'll be discussing, because it relates to the relationship between the knowledge that Black women have, as well as concepts such as power, oppression, privilege, and dismantling privilege and oppression, and instead seeking justice and seeing knowledge as sort of the beginning of how to do that. So as the syllabus points out, there are several questions related to it, but Collins explores the ways that women have produced and shared knowledge as a means of empowerment and as a form of activism in the face of oppression. So the syllabus asks us to consider several questions. The first question speaks to the author's discussion of the creation of oppositional knowledges by Black women. And so it asks us to consider how Black women have constructed our own meaning of Black womanhood. So for me, when she was discussing these things, Black womanhood and the construction of such related to this idea of insider and outsider knowledge and the privilege that was and continues to be upheld by white women, and how Black women, when they were working within households, saw this as really their experiences working with white women and the men in the household as negating this idea that they were actually empowered in some way, shape, or form. And so, in doing so, sorry. I'm not able to see any comments or anything. Okay, now I can see them. Hi, Julie. Um, so, yes. So, moving on, the things that I thought about when Patricia Hill Collins talked about this idea of reconstructing oppositional knowledges and constructing meanings of Black womanhood was something. I don't know how many people were um, part of the first discussion of part one. But when we were discussing those things, this idea of how Black women are positioned or seen in the media came up, and a discussion about Tyler Perry also came up. And so, um, in thinking about that, I continue to think about how Black women have often constructed and reconstructed concepts of Black womanhood, and how Patricia Hill Collins begins to deconstruct this notion, and how really this oppositional knowledge of Black women, particularly those working within the homes of um, of of white folks, really allowed them to um, sort of see themselves in a more positive light, and really have this, again, what Collins talks about as this insider outsider knowledge. Um, so, again, that question was, how do you all believe the reconstruction of oppositional knowledges aids in Black women's efforts to construct our own meanings of Black womanhood? So the next question, we'll just go to that one, is what were some of the core themes of Black feminist thought? So when reading these things, for me, as it speaks to in the text, some of the core themes were social justice, and how we can sort of participate in those things through knowledge construction and disseminating knowledge. The other thing was how we analyze and create responses to our own individual experiences and collective experiences. So essentially, this sort of goes into the next section, but also the next chapter, which I'm also supposed to be leading that as well. Part of that chapter is this idea that our shared and collective experiences, to those experiences create the core or foundation of Black feminist theory or epistemology, so knowledge creation. And so someone said having access to white spaces or spaces that Black women normally don't have access to really changes your perspective about your own lived experiences. Yes. And I would say that having, so trying to maintain self within those spaces, and and attempting to demonstrate sort of your need to exist and importance within those spaces as well changes your perspective. And for me, like, for example, I work within a institution of higher education, and that predominantly is a white space. And I lead a space that was created specifically for white women, to be honest. And for me to be in that space as a Black woman means that I'm like really deconstructing everything about that space in the first place. But it also tells me that the things that they like, certain people like to pretend to suggest as true for white womanhood, for example, is erroneous. Because when you work in these spaces, it deconstructs these notions and provides, again, that oppositional knowledge. Someone said one of the core themes of Black feminist thought is, and I'll put this up there, is how important community is, and that is true. Community is a central component of Black feminist thought. It is how we are constructing knowledge. It is how we are really saying to ourselves that I am not alone in this. Like, this experience is a normal experience for Black women, other Black women, and that is, like, in itself, the construction of knowledge, the construction of theory. And so community is central to that. And it is central to sharing that knowledge, because it is not enough to keep that information within that space, but we are attempting to, again, deconstruct and decolonialize knowledge as others with privilege might know it. So another question was, how do you define social justice within a Black feminist framework? And for me, and this is just, I guess, my personal view, but I do believe that, and we'll be able to hear from Collins, I believe on the 22nd, because Julesy will be interviewing her. But for me, defining social justice within a Black feminist framework means that we have to, like, social justice is, intersectionality is embedded within our idea of justice, within our idea of social justice. And in order to really create change, to begin to change, for example, because this spoke a lot about women in the academy, but also intellectuals outside of that space. In order to create that change, we really have to view the woman as this holistic being, not just like, for example, I am not just a woman, I'm a Black woman. I'm also a Black woman with a chronic illness. I am also, right, a Black woman from Detroit. All of these things come into play when it comes to my self-definition, but also how I experience the world around me. And so that also affects how I act in my activism in the world around me. So I want to say, yes, the need for self-definition within those spaces to transform it. Going back to the first question, someone brought up that it seems to bring forward ideas of power. So in white spaces, households, Black women observed the power dynamics at play, and then they saw the power dynamics between themselves and the society at large, and between themselves and white women. Yes, and I do believe, though, that insider-outsider status and sort of like this continuous flow between these spaces provided this knowledge that, to be honest, white women can't have. They just don't have that knowledge because they're not privy to the inside outside spaces. So it also says a step further, it allows Black women to question the notions of fragility and softness. And then, so I'll post this one up here. So it says, it seems like Collins slips the part about softness and fragility in, and I don't understand how it contributes. So I do believe that as we go to chapter 2, it breaks down the components of Black feminist thought. And one of those components of Black feminist thought is this idea of the ethics of care and the ethics of personal responsibility. And discussing those things, then we begin to understand the complexities that exist as like how we show up as Black women is complex. And so as theorists, everyday theorists, we are responsible for providing knowledge and knowledges that are grounded in experiences, and our experiences are the way that we justify knowledge, which is different from traditional what she talks about, like white men constructing knowledge and validating it. Our experiences ourselves validate that information. So we have to make sure to carefully and compassionately share that information. And we have a responsibility to do so as well. And I think that can be talked about a little bit more. Maybe we can go into that more in the discussion of chapter 2 in the future. The next point is it's not just about individual empowerment, yes, but community. And I personally believe that when thinking about Black feminist thought, in order for us to really begin to theorize and share, construct knowledges and disseminate that information, we do have to rely on the knowledge of other Black women. And it's also important in doing so to acknowledge the individual knowledges that Black women hold for themselves. It's not like either or, it's both and, if that makes sense. So another question that we have is, what factors can differentiate the experiences of African American women? So she talks about this. She talks about intersectionality, intersectional oppressions. She even, like in a more general sense, talks about this idea of Black women in the academy, but like Black women as intellectuals outside of those spaces. And really how those intersectional experiences and the oppressions that they face really shape what they know, and really aid in constructing knowledge, or epistemology, as it's called in higher ed, I guess. Another comment is, why do you all think Collins writes, I'm going to post this one. Why do you all think Collins writes dialectic of oppression and activism on page 15 instead of oppression and privilege? The full quote is, thus the dialectic of oppression and activism characterizing U.S. Black women's experiences with intersectional oppression also influence the ideas and actions of Black women intellectuals. So I hope other people will comment, because that's a really good question. But I do believe when we bring up this idea of a dialectic, it is this continuous conversation if you will. And it is this idea that really oppression should lead to activism, and it's this continuous sort of cycle of using our experiences for consciousness raising for the greater good, that greater good, and that understanding of the needs of the greater good, the intersectional needs of the greater good, then allows us to really begin acting or participating in varying forms of activism as Black women within academic spaces, but also outside of those academic spaces. So that was what I got from it. Another person says, absolutely, reading Black Feminist Thought feels cathartic and affirming personally. It also encouraged me to build community. And I'm happy you're here listening and learning as well. I'm glad people are here chiming in. Yes, like I've read, just a personal note, Black Feminist Thought so many times, but I did use it as part of my dissertation. I do teach a Black Feminist theory course, actually it's Black Feminist Theories course at the institution in which I work. And so like always teaching that course and sort of beginning with that text in order to like discover other readings is always a form of catharsis. It is affirming and reaffirming, and it provides a space for, I believe, Black women who are often been left out of these spaces. And even as a Black woman within an academic setting, it demands that other people within those spaces see me and see us. And it's just interesting that the majority of the students, I might have like one or two young Black women in those, young white women in those courses, but for the most part, it's Black women in there. It's like they always suggest that this has been missing from all of their work within their programs. So another question was, where and how have you seen knowledge production efforts in your personal life? And so one of the most important components of this chapter and really of this section was making sure that we understood that Black women were contributing to theory. Black women outside and inside of academic spaces were theorists, and that theory was based on their own experiences. In the first part of the chapter, which Morgan discussed, there was talk about the spaces and the ways that Black women shared that knowledge through things like poetry and music and things like that. And so knowledge production really just shows up, like for me personally, it shows up through art. That's what, like, my entire dissertation was on art and Black feminism, really Black feminist epistemology, and Black women creating art as a way of telling their stories, sharing their experiences. So another comment is, let's see. I think Collins creates a conversation. Oh, okay. So going back to that, the last comment I posted up on the screen, I think Collins creates a conversation between oppression and activism because at the beginning of that paragraph, she notes some U.S. Black women were reformists. So it seems like she's expressing oppression and activism as the sources of Black feminist theory, maybe. I don't think she uses privilege because she's not addressing the opposite force of or the cause of oppression, which is privilege, but rather how oppression and sorry, y'all, cut it off a little bit. I can't see it, but yeah, so I do believe she did bring up the idea about reformist Black women within spaces, and that is actually an important point to bring up, is that not every Black woman was focused on this activism, really focused on this activism inside and outside of these different spaces. And so it is, Black feminist thought is one of the major goals is to activate action within the community and things like that. So someone else said, I think she is also framing how Black women and Black feminists ways of knowing are coming from a unique position to speak on the insider outsider, not just as subjects of knowledge. To me, that's its own thing compared to privilege. Yes. So she is definitely talking about Black women as sharing their own experiences and how those experiences sort of are constructed from spaces inside, like within themselves, within their own experiences, but outside of these sort of other spaces where we sit often on the margins. Somebody said knowledge production on TikTok. Yes, okay, so that's referring to the last question that I posed, which was about how do these things show up? How does knowledge production show up in personal life? And so someone said TikTok. You're welcome. So someone said, thank you for the responses. Yes, art is so important. There is a Black woman artist and illustrator, Deborah Cartwright, who is doing a series called Black Women at Rest. I think that's the title, and it's gorgeous, but also so affirming that, not showing me all of the messages, y'all. Okay. Gorgeous, but also so affirming that resting and self-care is so important, countering the hustle culture. Yes. So I brought up the ethics of care earlier, and I know that the ethics of care has been interpreted by theorists and scholars in a variety of ways. But I do believe deeply that Black feminist theorists, or really Black women, period, manifest and demonstrate this ethics of care as self-care. And I also think it's important to understand that community care is also a component of that as well. Art is important. Art is a way that we theorize our lives and we share our experiences. Art is a way to sort of cross boundaries, build bridges in a way that some believe that theory cannot do. And really, that I know personally that theory, like, everybody doesn't get theory. Everybody is not in a space to access theory, but theory is happening outside of those spaces, and art is one of those ways. So visual art, but also music and performance. When I thought about how is knowledge production happening in my personal life, it's also like music and poetry and things like that. Like, I listen to different artists I wanted to say a name, but like I don't want to get chewed out on this feed. But like, I mean, to me, like when people dog, for example, Megan Thee Stallion out all the time for twerking, but like to me, that's her sexual freedom. That she is theorizing about a body politic. Like this is my body, and I'm gonna do with it what I want, what I please, and you still gonna give me my money. So it doesn't matter. But to me, that is one way that I'm not necessarily doing it, but I do believe that knowledge production takes place. Brittany L. said, our knowledge is validated in artistic spaces as opposed to academia, as Colin highlights, which is why Black women lean to creative spaces with ease. Yes, I do believe that to be true. It validates our knowledge, but it also, again, is that like form of care. It's a form of catharsis as well. It is sort of getting all of this out. It is laying the oppression out on a canvas, for example, or on a stage. So, yeah. Yes, I would like to have a conversation one day about art as well. It's something that I am really interested in. I'm going to post this one because Deborah Cartwright was brought up. And so this is her info for IG for those who are interested. Someone asked, is she also offering language for people who are sensing their own oppression, specifically Black women? This is in reference to the question about the dialectic of oppression and activism. So I do believe so. Like I think that this text, period, as in its entirety, provides a lot of much needed grounding and information for what we know to be true and for what we experience, but other people have not said it in this way. And so, yeah, so it is sort of really providing space for Black women to recognize their oppression, and also affording a space for us to understand that like oppression is one thing, but it's important to also act in a way that is really deconstructing that oppression in different spaces, and that looks different in different ways. And so, again, as many people have talked about, art is one of those ways. Being from Detroit, I know in Detroit we have a lot of urban gardens, for example. For me, those urban farms and urban gardens is another way that we are sort of we come together, right, and we theorize, if you will, about food deserts and the lack of grocery stores and spaces and the 99-cent menu at McDonald's and things like that. And instead of just complaining, there are groups of people, which, I mean, complaining to me is not necessarily always a bad thing. Like, you're complaining, you're acknowledging a problem, and that's the beginning. And so those complaints are then fed into this action within those spaces, and that is that activism. So moving from oppression to activism, so creating the urban farms and gardens that then are able to feed the community and that are able to provide the community, Black community specifically, with the skills and the money to reinvest in themselves and in their families and in their communities as well. Going back to my Megan Thee Stallion comment, somebody said, no judgment zone. I'm feeling City Girls' new album, although I feel like I've aged out of that genre. So I'm going to tell y'all, my dad's 76 and he's still quotes Tupac every single day. So I don't think there's an aging out of anything. And I'm just going to listen to whatever I want to listen to for however long I want to listen to it. So City Girls is dope too. Hey, Dara. So Dara said, when folks bring up Megan and Nikki, I call in the spirit of Lucille Bogan, blues singer of the 1920s and 1930s, who wrote "Shave 'Em Dry" and what know that the M is. And so now I'll post that one. And I think that's important too, because I think, so if we're saying that these women like Megan and Nikki, these artists, and our theorists as well, I mean, because I think, like, I know for sure Megan has actually said that she was a feminist. Lizzo also said that she was a feminist. Lizzo specifically said she was a Black feminist. And so I think it's important to sort of like really acknowledge the history of these things. Like, people love to position them in their own, like, this, like, oh, they're doing this and this is new. This is not new. This is something that Black women have really pushed against, these standards and respectability politics, like, since birth. Really, this is right. This is all about what we talked about in the first question, which was reconstructing knowledge and reconstructing Black womanhood, what it means to be a Black woman, and what it means to be like this ethical Black woman. What does it mean to be appropriate, right? Or this professional Black woman who fits in this category of a Black feminist and a Black feminist theorist. So that's important. This person said, I feel like artists are more validated, but many of them still voice issues they face with not seeing the same success and validation as others. Yeah, I do believe art. Well, and then artists can mean it's a large category. But yes, I do, like, for sure. Again, like, my dissertation was on Black art and performance as Black feminist epistemology. And one of the main things that each person said is that, you know, they all, like, have to sort of battle this idea of validating what they know to be true, validating what they see as art. Because, and one person actually is more mainstream now. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but she's still always validating, having to validate and justify her decisions about what she is creating and what she's doing. So, yeah. The next comment was, you can never age out of the importance of feminist theory and the body and full capitalist praxis. Never that. Nope, he can't. The next one is, maybe we can analyze a particular form of art and ask the artist to participate in one of our discussions for an interview. I think that would be dope. And I'm quite sure Julesy has some connects, and so can possibly find some people that we can interview and analyze, because just like reading the books that we read, we can analyze art, we can analyze music videos, we can analyze, you know, poetry in the same way. And so that's important as well. The next thing says, you can be forever young. It's okay to appreciate artists who speak to us no matter how old or young they are. If you connect to the art, celebrate it. I definitely believe that. Great point. The plant mothering and gardening in general is becoming a whole movement during quarantine. We should harass it for a greater purpose for the community. Yeah. So I mean, I do know, like, I'm in Ohio now, and I don't, so I'm not really familiar with any of these urban farming and urban garden movements. there are movements to create like a community grocery store because, or a co-op, if you will, because the area that I'm in has like huge food deserts, and it's pretty bad. It's bad when you have to drive 20 minutes, 30 minutes to get to a decent grocery store. And so their thing is to sort of create these spaces, not necessarily the gardening and the farming, but yes. So there are communities that are using it, not just during the COVID situation, but that they have been doing it. And I know, like, for example, I mentioned Detroit, like, and whenever I do these, I'm probably gonna mention it a lot because like I'm a Detroiter to the day I die. But I do know that Detroit neighborhoods have been like, they have stopped investing in them. And the food deserts are just one component of it. And so they're taking things into their own hands. So there are also artist communities within those spaces as well. And there's even a neighborhood arts festival in a neighborhood that people never really would go to. And then during that time, that festival brings people from all over to that space. So yes, it's important. Black artists have been involved in activism for a long time, going past the uplift era. Definitely. I mean, Black art, so I believe that, like, for example, poetry and music within the Black community were like part of the movement itself, like activist movements. Like, for me, there is no way to separate that what we see as traditionally activism, like protests and things like that, because music is protest. Like, there are tons of and art is a form of protest. Someone said, I'm gonna post this here for anybody who might want to get it. Read Angela Davis's Blues Legacies in Black Feminism. It is pretty dope. Someone said the Julia Davis Library in St. Louis is one knowledge production effort that she benefited from growing up. Post that there in case anybody wants to look that up. Someone brought up Hazel Carby. Thank you. As I get older, I'm more conscious of the ways I limit myself. It's something I'm working on, being open to appreciating newer, different ways of seeing the world. Yes. And I actually believe that, like, as I grow older, it's really just sort of like this transformation. And like, we never stop transforming. And when we do, that's a problem. And I do believe that, like, knowledge construction, all of these things, like art, everything we're talking about is part of that transformation. And so it's something that continues. Someone said Julia Davis was a St. Louis educator who founded a library that centered, yeah, and I think that's the one that is there, Julia Davis Library in St. Louis. You're welcome. Someone said, I'm so glad art is being thrown in. And I keep saying someone because it just tells me Facebook user. So I can't really see the names unless you say your name. So, this says, Donisha Blake, thank you. As I get older, I'm more conscious of the ways I limit myself. It's something I'm working on, being open to appreciating the different ways of seeing the world. Sean Sullivan said, Black women deserve to be respected and are so beautiful, strong, special, and amazing. I want Black women to be happy, smile. We want to be happy, smile, and feel safe as well. And yes, we do need to be respected So the last comment that I can see right now, I can go back to comments if it makes sense a little bit later, but I want to get to the next section. The last one that I see is there's a Black Women in Arts event happening online this weekend. So I posted it up there. Hosted by Pittsburgh CLO Academy of Musical Theater. So if anybody is interested, check that out. And then, so the next section, the last section really of chapter 1 that was discussed, besides like going over everything that's in the rest of the text, is developing Black feminist thought. And so this is where Patricia Hill Collins begins to really outline the intellectual traditions of Black women. And so she talks about Black feminist thought as this, I don't want to say thing, but sort of like this movement or means of excavating and reclaiming Black feminist intellectual traditions inside and outside of academic settings. She includes the knowledge that is possessed and shared often by our grandmothers, mothers, sisters, and I added other mothers, cousins, aunties, etc. Along these lines, Collins makes it known that the term intellectual is not related to the academy or to a middle class system. And yeah, so there were several questions for us to consider. And the first one is, how does classism, elitism around Black feminist theory deter women outside academia from aligning with Black feminist ideology? And I think this is an important question. And elitism within higher ed or academia is something that I ponder often, given my position within higher ed, or academia. And so I hope some people or folks can respond to that question. So I do see some other ones, more general. So the first one is, how did this book differ from Black literature that is being discussed in this current moment? I actually believe that Patricia Hill Collins brings in the work of Black writers at the time, and uses it as a means of helping us to understand how things that are quote unquote not so academic are actually part of Black feminism and part of theorizing as Black women. So I know she talks about Alice Walker several times. And some later, actually, in this section, she talks about hip hop music. And she actually has a text, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but she has a text on hip hop feminism as well. It's an older text. I think it came out in the early 2000s. But so I'll post the question. Or the one I'm referring to. I can say the other one as well. But how did this book differ from Black literature that is being discussed in the current moment? There's another question. Would you say this book was successful at changing some of your thought patterns? I do believe yes. So I believe that this book was successful at changing my idea of what knowledge could do. And actually, I spoke with Julesy earlier about my experience within academia as a student, and I speak to some of my close friends about it often. and how like I almost like gave up on obtaining my PhD because there was such a conflict for me, because I like knew that people like the Black folks in Detroit that I grew up around, they were holders of knowledge and they were sharing that knowledge and they were educators, they were community educators. And I remember like in one of our courses, we were talking about higher level knowledge and like this hierarchy of knowing. And it seems like the professor like favored this hierarchy, right? And so I was just like, I can't do this. Like, this is not something, right, that is speaking to me. Like, if I'm gonna do something, it's going to be about knowledge that is being constructed and shared outside of these elite spaces. And so that is even why I chose the topic that I did. So on art in public spaces and performance in art. So it has changed my thought patterns, and definitely rereading it makes me think back to like that moment. Like it has changed some things for me again that I even forgot that I read until recently. So I actually think that this question about saying the question again was about the one that I just asked. So that question was, how does classism or elitism around Black feminist theory deter women outside of academia from aligning with Black feminist ideology? So somebody, I think they were just speaking perhaps about when I brought up community, but most said, most definitely, I've been thinking so much about community and community building and the importance of it in the advancement of Black women. Support is necessary, almost survival. I'm gonna tell you, like, I'm gonna be honest, like, there, especially as of late with this pandemic, dealing with multiple deaths due to the pandemic, dealing with just the world around me, dealing with sort of a institution that likes to really hold on to colorblind ideologies. Like I've relied tremendously on some of my friends, some who might even be on this live today. So like without them, I don't think my survival would be possible. Like the community of other Black women. And I think this connects to another text that was read by the book club by Brittany Cooper. And she talks about in the opening about like her friends, her sister friends, like how she doesn't understand how Black women could not be a community with other Black women or in community with other Black women. And now I understand that because I was probably the person that was like, yeah, not really digging these friendships, but I had to sort of reconceptualize my idea of that community and what it looks like and what it means for me and my survival. So someone said this book changed how I thought about my positioning as insider outsider. I work in academia too, and I've been in PWI spaces most of my life. So PWI, for those who might not know, is predominantly white institutions. I always thought this was an awkward position, but now I see it as a powerful position. Yeah, so there is tons of research on this idea of the insider-outsider status and sort of moving as a bridge amongst them. And the knowledge that we gain for being in spaces that we necessarily otherwise wouldn't be welcome in. And so to me, it is empowering, but it's also important though, because we are sort of moving within these spaces. And sometimes as an outsider, our whole selves, our authentic selves are not necessarily welcomed. So to me, it's also important to make sure that we are caring for ourselves and our communities, even when we're existing in these hybrid spaces, if you will. So someone's answering the question about classism and elitism showing up in academia related to Black feminist theory. And it says, I think about this a lot, and I think so much of it that people just want to survive at the end of the day, especially in their worlds. So if there is a theory that feels too intellectual or too academic and out of reach, I can understand that someone might feel alienated. There's that. And aside from feeling alienated, I think that sometimes people want to take change slowly. So this brings us back to reformist Black women who would rather fight for small change than radical change, because radical change takes them out of their tribes. I mean, I agree completely. I do know for sure, based on the circles that I am part of, that it is easier to sort of just continue with the norm or sort of reform certain practices or policies, or kind of nicely check someone when they say something out of the way. Creating lasting change is hard work, and that it actually calls for us to, as Black women, to even sometimes like acknowledge the privilege that we have ourselves. So like, for example, as someone in academia, like the fact that I have a PhD and I'm working within academia, and I'm a light-skinned Black woman working in academia with a PhD, provides me with a large amount of privilege that someone else who might be, you know, like just starting out in their career in academia might not have, right? And so that for some people, when you have been oppressed in a variety of ways or marginalized, it's difficult to begin to really understanding and creating this change, because if we're going to really create radical change, we have to recognize the role that we play in maintaining the norm, and the role that we can play and must play, really, I would say. Patricia Hill Collins believes that we must play an active role. We have to recognize those things. So someone said, I think there's a lot of damage being done by respectability politics within the Black woman community. So respectability politics is something that I talk about with my friends often. I'm currently writing about it. I deal with it in certain, again, circles that I am part of. I don't fit the mold of, I believe, the mode of what it means to be, I don't know, a Black woman, period, to me, for a lot of people. And so the respectability politics comes up in my family, it comes up within organizations, it comes up at work, and it is damaging. It is disheartening, but I'm personally am dedicated to sort of deconstructing that and calling it out and calling it what it is, even if it angers people, even if it like positions me further to the margins. But I'm still going to have my voice. But yes, it is damaging tremendously. Someone said, and I think this was referencing the comment about being in academia and reformist Black women within those spaces and radical change. Someone said it's difficult and uncomfortable, like creating that change. Someone else said, yes, and you risk being exceptional and having your personalized seat at the table. Yes. And I think when you really call for change, like change in a particular culture of an institution, sometimes your seat is removed from the table. And so you enter at your own risk and you stand against the wall to demand that you still have a space. And I know that's what happens to me because I do believe my seat sometimes is taken away because people don't want me at the table or even to know where a meeting is occurring in the first place. So, someone had a broad question. Can you think of one theory that we should walk away from this book with? So Black feminist theory is to me, the overarching theory that that is being spoken about. But if I were to say a key point is that she is attempting to demonstrate that there is no, there are differences, but there should be no hierarchy in how we sort of position knowledge, who has knowledge, who shares it, what they know, how they come to know that, right? And so I think one of the main things that it is attempting to share is that women, Black women specifically, inside, like down the street in the neighborhood, Black women at the store, at the gas station, their experiences matter and their experiences connect to a larger holistic community-based experience. Like it is part of what we know. And those experiences are how we begin to understand the theory that Patricia Hill Collins is talking about. And so that is one important component, but I also think it's important to understand that when we have this knowledge, then it's important to understand that we have a responsibility. So she talks about in chapter 2, the ethics of responsibility as well, personal responsibility or accountability, sorry. And so it's important for us to actually take action when we have this knowledge. So it's not just theorizing or having knowledge for knowledge's sake. We have to do something with that information. Someone said radical change is not only difficult, but it's uncomfortable. It's definitely uncomfortable. Definitely. Unlearning respectability has been the work of my 30s. And listen, it is not easy. I have to check myself and give myself a time out often. Yes. I think, and it's a learned behavior. This is something that we've learned to sort of, it has been done to us. And so we often do it to other people. Even things like, what is this child got on? Like, why is she wearing these shorts like this? Like, I don't understand. And I actually used to do things like that until it was done to me. I remember going to a CVS and an older Black woman was like, this child then came out the house with those booty shorts. Did her parents know she got it on? Like, and I wanted to be like, does she know that I'm like in my 30s? Like, I don't understand. So I think when that happened to me, like it put me in check. It was just like, sis, like you can't be mad at this lady when you're doing it to other people. So like, understanding that other people were attempting to police my behaviors, dress, things like that helped me in unlearning the respectability politic. So someone said, I don't know about a theory, but I would say what I'm walking away with is the deconstruction of knowledge and theory and the significance of everyday stories. While other famous critical theorists rely on the everyday stories, say Marx, Foucault, Deleuze, whoever, they never say outright that they are valuing the everyday story and experience as a source of theory or knowledge. This is important. I really do think and know from what I've read that Black feminist theories, so not just Patricia Hill Collins, but even so Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, so those are like older ones, but older, not like in age, but theorists. But even like when we look at Brittany Cooper, for example, or I'm thinking of hip hop feminism, so Joan Morgan, and folks like that, it is important to understand that, right, like their stories are like this idea of theory. Like, so their stories are helping to construct this theory, their experiences, their everyday experiences. So without those experiences, there would be no Black feminist thought whatsoever. And without communicating those experiences, we would not, like, so when we read the story of Brittany Cooper, for example, and we're able to say, like, that same thing happened to me. Or I used to read the Babysitter Club books too, because it did something for me, right? Like, it's sort of building this community of knowledge, creators, seekers, and sharers. And so, yes, I agree that it's telling us, her book is telling us that theory is about deconstructing what we already know about knowledge, but that the everyday experience is important. Someone said respectability will creep on you in so many subtle ways. I have to keep checking myself. It will. And it's a constant thing that we have to sort of check. So this last one is race, class, and gender still constitute intersecting oppressions, but the ways in which they are now organized to produce social injustice differ from prior eras. This quote is from page 15 of the PDF. Third paragraph, this made me think, we read When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost and how important of a text it was in the 90s and early 2000s, yet now some of the ideas are challenged and consider controversial. Ideas and theories are always changing. Yeah, so, I mean, and that's the thing about knowledge. It is a construction. It is something based on experience, and our experiences change over time. And so, therefore, these things that we're reading, those ideas, will be challenged, and they will change over time. So yeah, I just realized that it's 8 over time. Sorry, I was really enjoying this. I will ask one last question. So because this last comment actually sort of referenced it. And so it's from page 16. And it says, Collins mentions that the music of working class Black women blues singers of 1920 and 1930s is often seen as one important site outside of academia for this intellectual tradition, which was also brought up earlier by cohort member Adara, and continued by citing Imani Perry's belief that Black women hip-hop artists serve as a new site of Black women's intellectual production. So again, it's from page 16. Referencing page 16, do you agree with this assertion? If so, how have you seen this idea manifest with contemporary Black women artists and hip hop?